It would appear that Jacob Zuma and Ace Magashule are getting the band back together again. They're forming an alliance of progressives.
Yeah, very progressive. We spoke to Ace Malshula on the show quite a few months ago now, and he was quite taken by the fact that A, two white people want to speak to him, and B, openly spoke to him as if he wasn't Satan. And we learned quite a lot about Ace Malshula at the time, and our takeaway was this man needs a project to stay out of prison and to make lots of money, which is why he started a political party. It appears that Jacob Zuma has exactly the same intentions. And if you go back in time, those two BFFs are now once again laying in the bed together. So, what does this mean for MK and ACT to come together in a mutual pact? I think it means they both know the ANC is dead and buried, and they just want to control the Free State and KZN respectively.
Now, that interview that we did with Ace Magashule actually wasn't that bad of an interview. I actually found Ace very likable. He was a very nice guy. He was very easy to talk to for all intents and purposes. He was actually just a guy trying to get along in politics in South Africa, which isn't actually really that easy these days. But there was one thing that we noticed quite a lot, and Ramon and I did comment on it, and that is a lot of his lines appear to be ANC lines. For example, he says, and I quote, "We want to make sure that we work and we prioritize blacks in general and Africans in particular." That's an ANC line. That's literally out of the ANC's handbook. What we're seeing here is that to a large degree, these political parties have fractured away from the ANC, but they are still the ANC, right? They're not really that different. And is it any real surprise that the RET faction that was expelled from the ANC is forming a pact of its own?
Because let's face it, if you wanted to destroy the ANC or have a lot of leverage over the ANC, Ace and Zuma could just join the EFF. It makes the most sense to me to join the EFF. There's already a 10-12% party. They could make it maybe a 20-22% party, and that is proper leverage against the ANC. That's where you hold the ANC by the balls and threaten to cut them off if they don't accede to your demands. But Zuma and Ace refuse to do that. They start their own projects. I don't think they trust the EFF in particular, but more importantly, I think they understand that their own projects are for their own selfish reasons. They want to control KZN and they want to control the Free State. They don't really care about controlling the country as such, because I think they understand the country's sort of gone, along with the ANC as well. So it's much easier to have a bit of control in these regions than to try attempt to control it nationally once again. They failed the first time. What makes you think they'll win the second time? They know that, so therefore they're just going to stay in KZN in the Free State. I really don't see why they would want to control everything, because they would have just joined the EFF.
These political parties aren't being formed on the basis of ideology. They're being formed on the basis of personality. They're being formed on the basis of factionalism. So you may ask yourself, why doesn't he just join Zuma? Well, that's because Zuma's very strong in KZN. He's very strong in the Free State. People know him in the Free State. So it would make more sense for him to remain ACT and to become the warlord of Free State, and for Zuma to remain strong as MK and to attempt to become the warlord of KZN. And would you know it, that's actually appears to be exactly what the game plan is.
Very much so. And this all started with David Mabuza back in the day. David Mabuza was the warlord of Limpopo or Mpumalanga, wherever he was premier at the time. And he managed to rig all sorts of sort of land reform projects and a variety of other projects for his own benefit. And this is exactly what these two want to do for their own benefit as well. But they both, late 70s, early 80s? They don't have a long-term goal. Zuma doesn't want to be, he's not going to be alive in 10 years. Or maybe he will. I mean, he's got 9 lives after all. But they're not building a long-term project for their descendants. They are building something for themselves in the moment right now to make some cash and to maybe have a bit of power and definitely to stay out of prison. Because if you're popular, if you're in the media, going to prison is a lot harder than if you're nobody. Ask Julius Malema. He knows exactly that as well. So at the end of the day, do we support these offshoots of the ANC? And fundamentally, I think I do. I think you kill the ANC by biting chunks of it off. The EFF started it. Cope started as well and died, and now these two are starting it as well. They just happen to be two of the more popular former ANC leaders of their time. And, at the end of the day, the more fracturing, I suppose, the better it is for South Africa, because the balkanization of South Africa is right ahead of us as we see. Combine this with Cape Secession, which they both are against. You have this melting pot of, well, retardation, which is exactly what happens in Retardistan.
Absolutely. And so you may also consider in yourself that those weren't the only two parties that fractured away from the ANC. Remember Holonisa from UDM? There's another breakaway from the ANC. Has actually been a lot of breakaways from the ANC. And so the problem inevitably becomes, especially now that we are in 2024 and we're in an election year, a lot of people worry that what's effectively going to happen is that people are no longer going to vote for the ANC, but what they may do is actually vote for the EFF. Remember, that's the whole big boogeyman. That's the enemy in the works. But that doesn't actually appear to be what's likely to happen. Because if you recall, when the EFF was first set up, a lot of the votes that it gained in the last election were basically protest votes against Zuma. They were basically people who didn't like Zuma. They joined the EFF to basically tell the ANC to do one. But now Zuma's got his own party. The EFF has got a bunch of rejects it calls MPs. Ace has got his own party. So, to a large degree, Ace is actually right. I mean, I hate to say that, but he's actually right. This is democracy, and you have given people choice. So, the idea that everybody's going to choose the EFF rather than the ANC is no longer certain. And our prediction that the EFF was probably going to be between 6 and 8% may actually come true purely because there's options, babies. And the EFF isn't the one that people want to pick.
Ironically, the fracturing of the ANC may lead to the demise of the EFF, because the EFF are no longer the official opposition on the hard left to the ANC. Now the EFF has a lot more competition than ever before. It's a little bit what happened with the DA and Action SA and all the other ones. However, in this case, I don't think the hard left, MK, ANC, EFF, and ACE, can actually do a moonshot pact. Because they're not there on ideological grounds, they are there on the grift. And sharing the grift is just not the same, man.
Because the purse is only so big, and only so many people can pillage it. Remember that the more mouths there are at the purse to feed, the less money there is for all the individuals you're going to share the moolah with. So no, it's actually very unlikely that these guys are all going to be able to get along. But we did predict that. Who's going to be the president, for example? Who's going to be deputy? Can't all be deputy, can you? But when you've got four parties, each of them with very wildly outlandish personalities, everybody's going to be vying for that position. But they can't all be king. At the end of the day, they have also all put themselves up in opposition to Cyril. Remember, the reason for these parties now existing, well, at least Zuma and his MK and Ace with ACT, is to be counter Cyril. So how are you going to go into a coalition with Cyril when you basically set up your entire party because you hated him? And then you're asking Jacob Zuma to basically be friends with Julius, even though Julius was the one primarily responsible for Jacob Zuma getting the boots in the first place. I mean, I'm sure they're all very polite in front of cameras, but, cameras don't always roll. And people have feelings. They have fifs of their own. So how these guys actually all get along in the real world, I just don't see it happening, Ramon. And that's a good thing.